Hi, welcome to my channel Semper Astra. My name is Maggie, and usually in my videos I talk about topics related to blindness. However, one of my hobbies is testing fragrances, wearing fragrances, and recommending interesting and original fragrances to others. And this is why in today's video I would love to share with you 5 reasons why I love, appreciate, and recommend Kayali fragrances. The first time I have come across a Kayali fragrance was in 2019, which was a year after Kayali fragrances were developed and created and were introduced to the market. And over the years, I started to notice that I reach for Kayali fragrances more and more frequently. And recently, I realized that I have Kayali fragrances that I love for all occasions and that I reach for them nearly on a daily basis. So the first reason why I appreciate and recommend Kayali fragrances is that, in my opinion, they put a lot of work into developing individual fragrances and fragrance collections. From my experience, all of the Kayali fragrances are beautifully blended, very well balanced, and I also am under impression that all of the ingredients that Kayali brand uses to create the fragrances are of amazing quality, because all of the fragrances smell beautifully at all stages of the duration power of the kind of projection, and basically they smell beautifully an hour after we apply it, 2 hours, 3 hours, till the end of their projection and lasting power. I also believe that Kayali fragrances are very original and in a positive way intriguing. Whenever I smell them for the first time or after a while of not kind of experiencing them, I'm always like positively surprised, and I often think, oh gosh, I don't experience similar interesting and beautiful fragrances when I test other fragrances. And this is naturally my own personal opinion, but I also feel that other people share my opinion, because I receive a lot of compliments when I wear Kayali fragrances. Many people ask me, oh, what is it? Please, can you tell me the name of the fragrance? And people share that they really want to test the fragrance themselves. Another thing that I wanted to mention talking about this point is the fact that you will probably notice that each name of Kayali fragrance has a number at the end of the name. And this number indicates how many proposed compositions were tested by Mona Katan and by her team, and how much work was put into selecting the ideal composition. So we will notice that, for example, there is a number 81 at the end of the fragrance name, which means that they tested 80 proposed fragrance note compositions, and only the 81st one was the one that they believed was the ideal one for this fragrance composition. So this is kind of another thing that I really appreciate. The last thing that I wanted to discuss in this point is the fact that Kayali fragrances, whenever they release a new scent, it is a new original scent with a new kind of story behind the scent, and they always also share what inspiration kind of was behind the scent. And so far, they never ever released any flankers, which also shows how much work they put into their fragrances. The second point why I value and why I recommend Kayali fragrances is the fact that all of the fragrances and collections are very well thought through, and that there is clearly an idea and a kind of theme behind all of the fragrances and all of the fragrance collections. The first thing that kind of shows us this is the fact that the brand invented their own Kayali accord, and this accord, the kind of the function of this accord is to give like a signature stamp to every fragrance that they release. So even when the fragrances are kind of very different from one another, they are from different fragrance families, they have a different strength, different vibe, there is still this thing that gives them this signature. There is still this common ground. And I personally value artists in all modes of art who can constantly produce original pictures or books or novels or poems, but who have their original style. And this is what this Kayali accord is for me. It is the evidence that Kayali fragrances are giving us new original fragrances, but they have their own style and they are faithful to their own style. And I really, really value this. Another very interesting thing is that whenever they release a fragrance collection, there is always a clear inspiration behind the collection. So for example, we have a vacation collection in which Mona Katan is sharing with us the fragrances that remind her of her favorite places in the world that she visited on her travels. And she is giving us the vibe and the smell that perhaps will remind us of our favorite places that we visited. Another example of the kind of inspiration behind the collection will be these collections where Kayali fragrances want to familiarize us with a particular fragrance note, and they present this particular fragrance note in variety of compositions, thanks to which we can kind of experience this particular note in various contexts. So we also start to notice many different facets to this particular fragrance note. Another point that I wanted to say about their kind of idea behind the fragrances is the fact that Mona Katan and her team created a scale which is called odometer, and thanks to this scale we can get familiar and we can get familiarized with the note of oud. So the note of oud is very rich, very potent, and sometimes it can be for some people very overpowering. But at the same time, it is a very beautiful note, and it is really worth to get familiar with this note and to experience it on many levels. So to help us to kind of get familiar with this note, Mona Katan created fragrances with different strength of oud note in them. And with the help of the odometer scale, she is indicating which fragrance has what strength of oud note in this composition. So if we see just one flame on odometer scale, we can be confident that it is like a fragrance for the beginners who want to kind of experience the note of oud. But if we see 5 flames, we can see that that will be the maximum strength of oud in this fragrance, and that fragrance is a good choice for people who love oud and who feel confident wearing oud. And with the help of this odometer scale, Mona Katan is kind of inviting us to the world of perfumery and is helping us to learn about the concept in the world of perfumery, which I massively, massively appreciate. The third point why I appreciate Kayali fragrances and why I recommend them is the fact that they are very universal. In Kayali collection, we will find fragrances for everyone. There are very light, gentle fragrances, sweet and bright fragrances, like fruity fragrances, very elegant fragrances, and also more heavy and complex fragrances. What is more, in Kayali collection, we have fragrances for all types of the weather. Fragrances that will be appropriate for the very hot, humid weather, fragrances that will be suitable throughout the whole year, but also fragrances that will be appropriate for more wintry and cold months. Also, because there is such a wide variety of the fragrances, I feel that people from all age categories will find something for themselves. And finally, we need to remember that most of Kayali fragrances are unisex, which is also kind of showing us how versatile the Kayali brand is and how universal the fragrances from this brand are. The next point, that will be the fourth point, I believe, that I wanted to mention is the fact that Kayali brand creates the fragrances in this way that they can be used on their own as individual scents, but they also can be layered. And Mona Katan and her team kind of give us ideas how we can layer the fragrances and what effect we will achieve by different layering combinations. But they also encourage us to experiment with different layering compositions. And we also need to remember that Kayali in English means my imagination, which again shows to me that the whole idea behind Kayali brand is to encourage people to use their imagination and to express themselves through the scent, through fragrances. The last but very important point for me is the fact that all of the Kayali fragrances are cruelty-free. That means that none of the fragrances were tested on animals, and none of the chemicals that are used to create Kayali fragrances are tested on animals, and that Kayali brand follows all of the ethical requirements, and that it is a very ethical brand, which personally is very important to me, and I hope that more and more people will start paying attention to this. I really want to encourage you to test Kayali fragrances, and please remember that they have 10 milliliter bottles, which is an ideal size to test the fragrance before we commit to the full size. And also, it is very interesting and beautiful that the tiny 10 milliliters bottles are created with the same level of attention to detail as big 100 milliliters bottles, which personally I really value and appreciate. Thank you very much for the attention today, and I hope to see you soon in my future videos. Bye bye!